Welcome to the countdown. Good evening, everyone. 8 o'clock. Make it 8:07 in New York City. Thanks for joining us at ABC7NY. We are streaming live wherever you are from Eyewitness News. I'm Bill Ritter, and we are counting down 5 weeks before the all-important midterm elections. 5 weeks from tonight. 5 times 7, 35 days. So much to talk about. More than 35 things to talk about tonight, but we're going to try to boil it down for you to the more important ones, from the Supreme Court nominee controversies to elections in our area and across the country. Joining me tonight as we discuss the big political stories here at home and across the country, ABC News political director Rick Klein, joining us from Washington and the ABC News studios there. And here in the studio with me, political analyst Hank Scheinkoff. Gentlemen, thank you both for joining us. I want to start with Brett Kavanaugh, who is making news tonight. For a lot of reasons. I guess we could start with a lot of things, but I want to start with the news that is breaking right now. The New York Times holding up, I'm going to hold up, a letter written by Bart, not Brett. He signed it Bart, which is important, and we'll talk about it in a second. A letter to his chums who are going off in a week in Maryland at the beach and the bay, and talking about all the things they have to do and saying some pretty outrageous things. Rick Klein, I know you've read this. You know, the White House tonight putting out a statement just moments ago saying this is all just sort of nonsense, and yes, we know he drank a lot, but this is talking about really sort of obscene drinking and throwing up a lot, not yet blacking out, but making his friends coming forward, Rick, and actually saying, yes, this is not what he said in the sworn testimony of his Senate confirmation hearing.
Yeah, it's either high school hijinks or it's perjury, and that's really where you stand. Depends on where you sit on this one. Right now, we've got Republicans saying, look, this is a guy that you're dredging up 30-year-old incidents from his past, his high school yearbook entries and letters to friends. He was organizing a so-called beach week for his friends that were from the elite private school world right here in Washington, D.C. To the other side, this is a pretty stark example of a guy that was binge drinking pretty heavily in high school, maybe engaged in other things. There's references in there to puking and making a mess of the house and the like. Again, all of that may not matter at all, except last Thursday, he was pretty clear, Kavanaugh's very clear, that he didn't drink to excess, that he never blacked out, which is key to some of the women's claims, and gets to the overall question of his credibility and his veracity, his honesty in front of the committee last week.
And Hank, let's talk about the political fallout of this. Sure. You know, can Kavanaugh survive all this? What's a little lie? What's a sort of lie? What's a big lie? How do you make the determination?
Well, it's one thing to say you didn't drink. It's another thing to say you forgot blackouts. I mean, that they didn't happen. It's absurd by definition. The problem here is that he's a perjurer, and if the Republicans go ahead and do what they want to do, the reaction by women across this country and others will be quite extraordinary. But the reaction by the base, whatever that may be, and we keep hearing these words, the base may in fact be just as significant.
Well, let me talk about the base, gentlemen. And Rick, I know you know this because it was you saw the polls that were coming out, and I know, Hank, you did too. The polls that came out this week from Quinnipiac showed that 48% of all respondents said, of Americans, should not confirm, the Senate should not confirm Kavanaugh. Should confirm was 42%. So he's underwater on that one, and obviously the White House sees this. It breaks down into some really interesting things. And let's keep that graphic up as we look at that before I have you guys talk about this. Women oppose the confirmation, Hank, to your point, 55 to 37%, while men supported confirmation, 49 to 40. Black votes, 88 to 11% opposed the nomination and the confirmation. And independents, this is maybe key, opposed the confirmation, 49 to 39%. Hank, let me start with you. How do you parse that?
I would look at independent voters and women voters immediately, and I'd say in states where independents are a significant number, that they have real trouble if they let this guy. And that's a lot of the country, by the way. Independents are generally a step toward going to Republicans. What this might do is reverse the order of things. And independents, in fact, being a step going back to being Democrats, because it's so extraordinary. A perjury, potentially, and the attacks on women together is something that people just can't tolerate.
You're the political consultant for the White House.
Right.
Let's just pretend here. What if you were? What would you be telling the president about this nomination?
Withdraw. And fight it, and withdraw and go back to economic arguments, announce an infrastructure plan that creates jobs, and learn to fight another day.
And don't wait, Rick, is that what that means? Don't wait until the Senate just doesn't have enough votes to confirm him?
Well, it's very possible that it gets down to it and the Senate either rejects or they have to pull the nomination. In fact, Lindsey Graham addressed that just today. He said if that happens, President Trump should nominate him all over again. Let's put on the midterm ballot the issue of Brett Kavanaugh and whether he should be on the Supreme Court. I'll tell you, there's a lot of Democrats who would like to see that happen as well. So I'm not sure about that as a political strategy. But it is a curious story in another sense, Bill, that all of this talk about all of the high school hijinks and all these things are coming out and potential perjury in front of the Senate Judiciary Committee last week, it comes down to literally 2 Republican senators who have to say they're comfortable with this, and he's going to be a Supreme Court justice for the rest of his life. It's those 2 votes, Jeff Flake, Lisa Murkowski, Susan Collins. 2 out of those 3 say yes to this. It is all done, and they'll be voting by the end of the week, and he's on the court. So it's a really strange thing where you have journalists digging this stuff up, FBI agents actively investigating his background, and yet just hanging on the balance here with literally a handful of votes that could make the difference and end this whole argument.
As long as I have you on the line there, Rick, Dr. Ford, Christine Ford, who gave incredible testimony last week on Thursday, she says the FBI hasn't contacted her yet. Do they really have to contact her? I mean, they have her whole testimony there.
Yeah, I mean, it's an open question as to whether they feel like it's necessary. I think Dr. Ford's lawyers are letting this be known because they feel like she should be asked to go back to some of the details. But if the FBI is under this time constraint, there was some confusion about their actual mission in this case early on. They've opened that up a little bit. I'm not clear that there would be a necessary box for them to check, but clearly Dr. Ford's lawyers feel differently, and Dr. Ford is eager to come forward and cooperate with this investigation, as truncated as it is.
Prediction, Hank, what's going to happen this week?
I think that they will not put him on the bench, and I think it will be exactly what Rick said. If Murkowski or Collins vote to do this, they will be in very, very serious trouble at home. Okay. They can't do it.
And of course, Schumer wants to have a briefing about the FBI thing. We will see what happens. It could be quite a week to come. I want to go to something, and Rick, I'll get your opinion about this first, because you're the political director and you're overseeing the political coverage of ABC. And something happened this week at the White House that was extraordinary. As a father, as a brother, I was insulted. I really was insulted. I will say that. President Trump calling on our colleague Cecilia Vega, the White House correspondent for ABC News, and I want to play this, and I want to get both of your reactions to what happened because it made a lot of news.
Okay, question? Yeah, go ahead. Sure. She's shocked that I picked her. No. She's like in a state of shock.
I'm not thinking, Mr.
That's
President.
okay. I know you're not thinking. You never do.
I'm sorry?
No, go ahead. Go ahead.
Wow. She was going to ask a questions we've been asking tonight about Judge Kavanaugh and what the status was with the controversies over the confirmation. Rick, when you saw that, what did you think?
I have never been more proud of a colleague to stand up there. How difficult that is. Literally the eyes of the world upon you. The President of the United States insults in that casual way her for no reason. I think that was personally, I feel like it was disgraceful to just say that casually like that. But Cecilia handled it with such grace and such class, and she came back. She asked her question. She insisted on getting a question later on the topic she wanted to ask about, and the President, to his credit, did come back to her. But again, Cecilia could not have handled that better. I think she showed the grace and her wits about her and her journalistic chops in that moment, which must have been so difficult to have the President just feed away like that.
Hank, given that it was just a couple days after the Dr. Christine Ford testimony and that President Trump sort of not a little tone deaf to what was happening, to trash a female reporter like that.
It's another reason to pull the nomination as soon as possible. Why? Because all this does is reinforce the sexism, the demeaning of women, and the absolute sullying of the office of the President of the United States.
Let me move on to the midterm elections because we talk about the Democrats need 23 House seats to get back to flip the House. The Republicans are going to try very hard, and they are trying hard to hold on to that. But the Senate also could be a spoiler as well for the parties. I want to look at what happened this week in New Jersey. The challenger to Bob Menendez, Mr. Hugan, has had an unbelievably aggressive ad campaign challenging Bob Menendez about his ethics, even though he was a hung jury, a mistrial in his ethics trial and his federal corruption trial. The Senate, did chastise him, no question about that. There was a poll, and I know, Rick, that this was not airworthy, but we aired it first, and then we found out it wasn't airworthy. But it did show from a university, Stockton University near Atlantic City in New Jersey. They showed Hugen within 10 points, I'm sorry, 2 points of Senator Menendez. He was up 9 points just a week ago. He should be up 20 as an incumbent. How tight is this race, Hank?
Very tight. And New Jersey could be an upset. Now, let's see what happens in the last 3 weeks. If the Democrats start dumping a lot of money in there because Menendez is under attack, which I think they're probably going to have to do, that could flip. But again, in New Jersey, people are not really worried about U.S. Senate races. It's not how the state functions. They're more concerned about governors and state Senate. Why? Because that's where the dough flows. They don't get much out of a U.S. Senator.
Hank, I don't know how much. Rick, I don't know how much you pay attention to the ads. I don't think you can see them up there, but down there. But they've been very aggressive and effective by Mr. Hugen against Bob Menendez.
And the concern I've heard in Washington is that Democrats should have been more aggressive in forcing Menendez to the sidelines, maybe even in quietly encouraging a primary challenger. I think they felt like the legal process would play out as it needed to, and then they could leave Menendez alone and not have to worry about it because it's a year where the president is so unpopular in a state as blue as New Jersey. But if they've got to worry a month, 5 weeks before the election about New Jersey, they have major problems, and they cannot afford any upsets like this. They are playing on defense almost everywhere, all 10 red states where they have their own incumbents running for re-election. It is a brutal map. New Jersey, at least, is a bright blue spot in that. So you can't afford to have to worry about New Jersey if you have dreams of taking over the majority.
But if you're a Republican, of course, running in New Jersey, you are not running with Mr. Trump by your side. You're sort of saying, I want to talk about all the other issues that have nothing to do with Trump. And of course, the Democrats are saying they're running against Trump. So he's a figure in the race, but for different reasons on each side.
I think that's exactly right. And it's difficult to separate yourself at the national level. I think it's easier if you're running for governor. But we'll see if I think Hank's right that the Democrats need to open up the bank a little bit. And that'll be the real sign of concern is whether they start spending money when they have so many other places that they need to be on offense.
Mr. Scheinkoff is saying that the money will flow into Mr. Menendez's coffers soon enough. There's only 5 weeks left. I want to show both of you a poll that was done. And I know you saw this, Rick, by the Pew Research Center, that the international ratings for the president are at a very low point in terms of what the countries feel about him in particular. Look at all those low numbers right there. Certainly Mexico, France, and Germany. 25% in Canada, although they just passed the NAFTA redo, NAFTA 2.0. Russia, 26%. That's higher than you might think. 10% in Germany, 9% in France. All this happening at a time when Melania Trump takes her first solo international trip. She got on an airplane and went to Africa, and there she is by herself going, not with the president. What does this mean, Rick? What's she trying to do there?
It's a pretty extraordinary moment to see her stepping out of her husband's shadow like this to go to a nation or continent that the president had some colorful private words for in the past. I don't think even on a web show we can repeat those, Bill. So those kind of memories are going to haunt her and haunt the White House. But I think as she looks to kind of spread her influence, use her platform in different ways, she talks about cyberbullying, for instance, and children's health and children's education. Maybe the safest place to do it is overseas, and I think you're seeing it. A little glimpse of her and maybe her personality in these coming days. You're right, the nation's standing on the world stage is pretty low. We remember the president just a week ago getting laughed at the United Nations. Yep. That wasn't a mistake. I think it all plays into that, and I think we'll see if Melania Trump has some interesting things to say in the days ahead. And
yet, Hank, in a time, in a week that could be absolutely crucial for the president and his pick for the Supreme Court, she, maybe during the vote or his withdrawal, either one, isn't going to be in the country.
Well, pretty extraordinary, but what this does highlight also is that Trump is the herald of change, and he's also the reaction to change, and that the international system that's worked pretty well throughout since the end of World War II is absolutely falling apart. One last thing. The Americans have missed the boat in Africa altogether. That she's going there is well and good, but the Chinese are beating us. They're able to get a hold of immensely important stocks of minerals like cobalt in countries that are underdeveloped, and they're controlling those. Cobalt means electric cars, and it means your cell phones, frankly. Those are the things that are happening, and we're not paying attention. And this administration ought not just to be sending the First Lady. You ought to be going back there to get in front of China before they control everything in the world.
Here, I thought you were becoming a cobalt expert, but you turn around to say that, hey, that's a key ingredient in some super consumer products that China makes.
The auto industry, the future of the auto industry is electric cars. You can't do it without cobalt.
Before we go, I want to show a couple other screens, and I will just tell you what the numbers are, Rick. This is about the international approval rating. Again, this time approval rating, and it's not just Mr. Trump, it's also about the U.S. Israel, This is the same Pew Research Center poll. 69% approval in Israel, 80% approval in South Korea. That, I think, has to be considered a big victory for Mr. Trump, given what's happening in North Korea. And Mike Pompeo announcing today he's going this Sunday to North Korea. And in the Philippines, 83%. What are those? You don't see the figures there, Rick, but what do they say to you?
Well, I mean, those are places that he has obviously inculcated a pretty close relationship with the leaders, Israel and the Philippines even, despite a lot of black marks on the record of the president there. He has tried to create a close relationship. I think in South Korea, he's undeniably changed the dynamics on the Korean Peninsula and brought things to a different point of view after a long time of standing still and worried about missile tests. He has scrambled a whole lot of alliances and a whole lot of tests. And I actually think the president and the White House wouldn't shy away from any of these numbers. I think they'd lean in on it and say, you know what, we're not there to please the world. We're there to make sure that we're good by our friends and that we please Americans first.
Which is different what you said politicians and presidents have done over decades.
Look, it's a very different, the world is changing radically. That's why Donald Trump is there. He's a reaction to this. It's going on. The countries where he's doing well or where people like us are countries that feel that they're not getting enough respect anyway. If Israel gets any attention paid to it by anyone, the numbers go up. Ditto in South Korea, ditto in the Philippines. It's just an interesting time. Now, sending the First Lady to Africa, going backwards, send the president. We need to best the Chinese someplace. Okay. And they're beating us there.
Hank Scheikoff here in New York. Rick Klein working overtime for ABC News in New York and in Washington. Rick, I appreciate you coming in and
thank you, Bill.
And staying late at the Bureau. I appreciate it. We'll see you guys on Sunday for Up Close. I appreciate that too. Should be quite a week for the rest of the week too when it comes to Judge Kavanaugh. We'll keep you posted, of course, on air and online. Thank you for joining us for this edition of The Countdown. Be sure to watch us live every Tuesday night, 8 o'clock, ABC 7 NY, streaming live on Facebook, YouTube, Twitter, every social media, and around the clock always on Eyewitness News Channel 7, including tonight on Eyewitness News at 11 o'clock with me and Sade Badarainwah. I'm Bill Ritter. For all of us here at Channel 7, the whole team, have a good night. We'll see you at 11 o'clock.